Ever since Andy and Eagle had their friendly rival match at the end of Advanced Wars 1, which resulted in both Orange Star and Green Earth losing more troops than in the rest of the war combined, I thought to myself how horribly we treat our troops in Advanced Wars. Infantry are pretty much used as meat shields to protect our more valuable units, and we don't really care how many troops we lose as long as the objective is filled. That's okay, Andy. You may have literally lost an entire armada and thousands of soldiers, but at least we saved that one missile unit, am I right? Truly, the world of Advanced Wars is a monstrous place, where COs play with their soldiers as if they're little more than toys. And today I want to put a stop to that. Today I want to see if it's possible to beat the hard campaign of Advanced Wars 2 without losing a single unit. The rules are quite simple. At the end of each mission I have to show the units lost tab, and it needs to be 0 before I can claim victory. Rankings don't matter. How I beat a map don't matter. The only objective is to win the map without a single loss. I am allowed to do things like combine my units together, as this does not count as a loss, and I think this will be a pretty viable strategy on most maps. The goal is to make it all the way through the campaign and defeat Sturm at the end without having lost a single unit. This means that I don't have to defeat every single map in the campaign, as it is not required to unlock the final factory mission. So there definitely will be some strategy in which maps I choose to play and which one I choose to skip. So the question is, can it be done? Can you defeat the hard campaign of Advanced Wars 2 without losing a single unit? Well, let's find out. The hard campaign starts off with Mission 1, Border Skirmish, and it's a pre-deployed map with Sami versus Flak. Flak is a terrifying opponent in this challenge because of his unpredictable luck damage, so I have to be very careful when his powers are ready. Even though Flak's army vastly outnumbers my own, I do have the advantage of a choke point, so it's easy to make Flak box up his army. Since I start off with an artillery, a rocket, and 2 battlecopters, I have a lot of freedom in how I wish to approach this map. Flak does have an artillery and rockets of his own, however, so I need to be careful. However, he only starts with 2 anti-air, so the moment we take those down, our battlecopters have free reign to harass his units as they please. But that doesn't mean they can do whatever they want. During the battle, one of my battlecopters actually gets brought down to 4 HP thanks to Flak's luck damage, so that gave me a brief heart attack. Still, this mission is actually pretty easy. After I deal with Flak's medium tanks, I am free to cross the river and mop up his remaining forces, though there are a few close calls with his artillery nearly killing one of my mechs. I think to end this map in style with a victory march, but I foolishly destroy Flak's last APC, winning the match. And then I realize I never showed my scoreboard, so I have to restart the map as this is one of my core rules. And this time I'm able to show proof that I have 0 units lost. I beat the map and still managed to pull off an S rank. Pretty cool, let's move on to the next one. Up next is Mission 2, Orange Dawn, one of my least favorite hard campaign maps. This time we play as Max going up against Flak in a map that requires you to take the most tedious roundabout path possible. On top of that, you have to sit through a black cannon animation at the start of Flak's turns, which gets old really fast. My standard strategy for this map is to build an early APC and send some infantry across the map to capture the harbors in order to get some battleships out. You can use Flak's own cannon against him, as while the AI is programmed to avoid it, it will still take engagements within its range if it is able to do so. So the idea is you use the black cannon to force Flak to bottleneck himself on the bridge where your battleship can shoot down his units. Turns out that this strategy is not viable in this challenge though. The black cannon does hurt Flak's troops, but it also sends them into repair mode, forcing Flak to retreat them back, and this will allow him to reinforce with fresh units to the front lines that can kill off my troops. This makes me lose an infantry, and thus I have to restart the map. On my second try, I changed my strategy a little. I do open up an APC, but this time I also build a tank. Infantry aren't strong enough to hold a bridge on their own, but a tank might be if I can bottleneck a Flak infantry in front of it. This works much better, as Flak's infantry can't take down my tank unless it is really low. But the strategy is still far from foolproof, because Flak's powers still allows him to do a lot of damage to my vehicles if he gets lucky, meaning I have to constantly watch his power bar. Still, patience is the name of the game here, as I accrue more and more battleships as time goes by, and eventually I'm able to reach a critical mass where I'm able to just blast away most of Flak's dangerous units as they approach me. And the only thing left to do is to hold my breath every time he pops one of his powers. Flak can do a total of 40 luck damage with his brute force and 80 luck damage with his barbaric blow, so I need to watch my units' HP carefully whenever they're about to come around. The rest of the battle is a slow turtling forward with battleships, but I also have to build up a large force of tanks. Flak still has some indirects which are very strong on this map, and with his powers popped they can easily force a reset if they target my tanks or an infantry. And because of Max's -1 range on indirects, I cannot outrange Flak's rockets with my battleships, meaning I have to rely on a push with Max Blast eventually. After I successfully bait out a barbaric blow from Flak when none of his units are in range to capitalize, I pop my superpower and roll my tanks forward, taking out Flak's rocket. At this point, the match is pretty much won, but I still play carefully as I advance towards this HQ with my tanks, as Flak's mechs are still capable of one-rounding them if they roll max luck with his powers up. This luckily does not happen, and I'm able to claim my victory on day 34 with no losses. And it turns out I still get a perfect S rank. Seriously, the Advanced Wars 2 campaign requirements are way too lenient, even on hard mode. I get that they went a little too crazy with these rankings in Advanced Wars 1, but a middle ground would be nice. Up next is Mission 3, Andy's Time. This chapter is the first to introduce black cannons, stationary structures with long ranges that deals a fixed amount of damage to units they fire on. But luckily they can't destroy units, only bring them down to 1 HP, so they're not super dangerous in regards to this challenge. For this mission, we need to destroy the large black cannon on the left-hand side, and in the hard difficulty version of the map there's also 2 additional mini cannons on the right. It turns out, however, that my normal strategy for this mission does not need to be altered at all for this deathless run. You can win this map without taking any casualties by simply choosing to recon rush Flak. The recons can bypass the mini-cannons and reach Flak's infantry before they can capture anything of note. And for some weird reason that I don't understand, Flak never builds any units on day 5, which allows my 2 initial recons to base block him completely, shutting down his production of new units. This turns the mission into an absolute cakewalk, as I can take my time routing Flak's remaining infantry with my recons, while I send a transport copter across the map to capture the left-hand base, which I will use to build a rocket and start attacking the black cannon. I do decide to pick up the lab map, which unlocks the only optional mission in the Orange Star Hard campaign, though I am unsure if I even want to attempt that mission in this challenge, as it sounds really tough. But we'll save that one for later. Anyway, I blow up the black cannon to win this mission, and once again I get a perfect 300 S rank. Easy peasy. With the 3 first missions beaten, we can now choose where we go next, though the choice doesn't really matter too much in the end, as we have to clear all Orange Star missions to unlock the factory level, with the exception of the lab mission of course. I decide to start with the easiest map first, which is Sea for All. This is one of my favorite missions of the hard campaign, as it features a battle between Andy and Hawk, where they are only allowed to build naval and air units. This is a mission where Andy really shines. Not only does his repair-based powers counter Hawk's global damage, but being able to restore 5 HP to expensive units like fighters is just really nice. And the 1 extra movement he gets is really good in a battle like this, where striking first is everything. Going into this map, I figured it wouldn't be all that challenging to do it deathless, and it turns out I was absolutely right. As long as you're careful and stay out of Hawk's range, it's very easy to keep your own units alive, especially with Andy's repair powers. I even deploy a few cruisers to take down Hawk's fighters, as they tend to dart into my range with little regard for their own safety, and the cruisers don't take any damage back, so they're very ideal for this job. It's not a very exciting mission, as I work up a death ball and slowly push it towards Hawk's base, but it is nice to get a calm mission before the storm, because I know what's coming up next. Anyway, that's another victory with 0 losses and another easy S rank. Let's move on to the next one. Up next is Mission 5, Mountain Ops, another one of my least favorite hard mode exclusive missions in Advanced Wars 2. This one features a battle in the mountains between Sami and Lash, and I thought this was going to be a complete snooze fest, but it actually ended up being one of the more exciting missions in this run. Normally, how I tackle this map is to spam mechs and slowly march across the southern mountains, as the northern black cannon shuts down most of the upper part of the map. In a deathless challenge, however, mech spamming does not sound very attractive, as having tons of squishy units all over the map means that I run a pretty big risk of one of them getting picked off, especially when Lash pops her prime tactics, which allows her units to dart over terrain at no cost, and also gives her infantry 80% extra firepower in the mountains. And that sounds like a restart waiting to happen. So I instead opt for a more stealthy approach. I build a single APC and transport my infantry to the 2 northern bases, while building as few units as possible so I can save up for a horde of rockets. I activate one of the missile silos to damage Lash's infantry to slow down their capture rate, and I also use my APC to bait out Lash's missile, as it always targets the most valuable unit on the field. After that, I start spamming out rockets in force, and build a single medium tank to protect the choke point. And the plan is that once I reach a critical mass of indirects, I aim to take down the black cannon and get a single infantry within range of Lash's HQ so I can end the game with a victory march. Turns out, however, that is not going to be easy. You see, since I cannot sacrifice my own units, I also cannot take a lot of engagements, and that means my victory march builds up incredibly slowly, as you only get 50% power charge from killing units in Advance Wars 2. And since I don't really want an infantry battle with Lash in the mountains, this means letting her take the southern base, which means she now is slowly starting to creep up on me from all sides. I really start to sweat once our first prime tactic comes in, as I have to account for her units being able to traverse terrain, which can easily lose me a unit if I'm not careful. As Lash's unit starts to build up to a critical mass, my victory march is nowhere near ready, and I'm worried that if this keeps on going for much longer, then at some point Lash will be able to snipe off one of my weaker units. So I decide to take a daring gamble. Lash doesn't have a lot of units around our HQ, and it is completely exposed, so I decide to try and cap it the traditional way. Sadly, Lash sees it coming and she builds a tank to stop me, and I'm not sure if a Lash tank on a base is capable of interrupting a Sami HQ cap, so I actually go to Advance Wars by web to boot up the damage calculator to check. And normally, Lash does not have a shot, but her prime tactics is dangerously close to being ready again, which will definitely let her do it, as you need to reduce a capping Sami infantry to 3 HP to interrupt the capture. However, while my victory march may not be ready, my double time is, and powers in Advance Wars 2 gives your units 10% bonus defense, which is just enough to ensure Lash cannot interrupt my capture. So I pop my normal power, and with 0 deaths, I am able to capture Lash's HQ and send her scurrying away from the mountains. This mission is an A rank, but I'm not complaining. It was actually a lot of fun. Up next is the mission I've been dreading since the start: POW Rescue. On this map, you control a pre-deployed army as Max going up against Adder, and you have to navigate yourself through a fog of war maze filled with indirect units and minicannons. This mission is a bit odd as it presents itself like you're on some kind of timer, but this actually isn't the case. There's a stationary enemy rocket on your HQ which prevents Adder's infantry from capping it, and there's no day limit on the mission itself, so you can just take your time as it's actually a route map, and that's exactly what I end up doing. I take up a defensive formation around my starting position, and I just let Adder's units come to me. About half of his units are aggressive, meaning they will move towards you at max speed. So if I just hunker down and kill them as they come, that means I can cut the amount of units I have to deal with on this map by half. Still, despite doing this map is still terrifying, as Adder has both indirect units and anti-air hidden in the woods, meaning I have to take baby steps. One misstep and I have to restart, and that is absolutely nerve-wracking. Luckily, I've played this mission a bunch of times before, so I know roughly where Adder's units are hidden, so it's quite easy to scout them out using my battlecopters and take them out. Still, there is some uncertainty on this map, as it's not always easy to know where Adder's anti-air are at all times, and with his movement boosting powers, you never know when they might suddenly be in range of your battlecopters. Speaking of battlecopters, you start with 4 of them in this mission, and they are extremely helpful, but it is also very important that you keep your APC alive, because if not, your copters will definitely crash due to a lack of fuel, as there's no airports here where they can resupply. And a crashed unit is treated as being lost, by the way, so I have to be careful. I make my way slowly through the maze, and I pop my first superpower kind of early on as I run into a wall of indirects in front of a minicannon, and I'm able to sweep them off the map with relative ease. The rest of the chapter is a slow crawl as I scout out each forest meticulously, making sure there's no sneaky units coming in to ambush me from out the fog. I also take every chance I get to repair my units at allied cities, making sure my army is on full health before I move on to the next destination. Halfway through the map, I park my rockets in one of the forests and start taking pot shots at the enemy units around my HQ, though I have to be careful not to shoot on the rocket, as that might make it go into repair mode, which will leave my HQ undefended. Still, at this point, it really just is all about crawling slowly forward inch by inch. I hope those prisoners of war aren't being tortured. Towards the end, I almost ruin my entire run as I use a battlecopter to scout some woods, only to realize that this costs fuel in Fog of War. My battlecopter is now on 0 fuel, and my APC is on the other side of a frickin' river, and I can't even combine it with another battlecopter as it is on full health. There's a single recon left that I can see, and I just have to hope it's the last one, and thankfully it is. I would not have relished restarting the map at this point. With 0 deaths, I beat this dreadful mission, and somehow I'm still able to get an S rank. What the actual hell? At long last, the factory mission is unlocked, and we are ready to wrap up the Orange Star campaign. But first, I would at least like to attempt the lab mission. I know it's going to be hard, but beating it will let me build Neotanks as Orange Star, which can potentially come in handy for future missions. So let's attempt mission 7, Test of Time. Why do I dread this mission so much? It's a pre-deployed map where you control Andy, and you have to capture Flak's lab within 7 days or rout all of his forces. This mission is brutal because it has a time limit, so I can't just camp my starting position and deal with Flak's units as he charges at me. I have to advance forward. Flak has a ton of stuff, including medium tanks, artillery and rockets hidden in the woods, and even a goddamn battleship in a lake. How did that even get there? This means I'm gonna have to play it defensively for at least the first few turns. It's easy to make Flak choke up his units as the AI have to move them in a very specific sequence, meaning it's very bad when it comes to cramped quarters. It usually ends up placing things like anti-air and recons in front of your medium tanks and just having them stand there doing nothing. By placing my strong troops in front and my indirects in the back, I can easily blast away Flak's scary troops from a safe position. Well, at least until he pops Barbaric Blow. At that point, it really is up to the RNG goddess. In case you didn't know, the AI actually cheats with luck damage in Advanced Wars. It actually knows beforehand how much damage it will do, so if there's a high number coming up, the AI will take advantage of it if possible. Luckily, Flak's first superpower is a flop, and I don't end up losing any units. And Andy's hyper upgrade comes in at the perfect time to mitigate most of the damage he was able to do. At this point, I have to charge forward, as I don't think I'll be able to capture the lab without taking casualties. So I instead opt to go for a rout. This is not easy, however, as Flak has not one, but 2 artillery positioned directly adjacent to each other in the woods, with mountains on either side, making it impossible for me to approach them without taking damage. However, I am able to bust into his lab area and wipe out almost every single unit he has, but with only 2 days left on the timer, it's gonna come down to a few clutch moves. However, a Flak recon suddenly decides to appear near the artillery, and I realize I don't have the damage output to take them all out. I pop my hyper repair to squeeze out every last drop of firepower I can, but sadly it is not enough. Flak's artillery still stands, and I lose the map. So, while that didn't go great, this mission is far more beatable than I first thought, so I decided to give it another go. The second time around, I'm far more aggressive with my troops, opting to blast away Flak's units even though it risks letting his medium tanks come to the front lines. As he pops his Barbaric Blow, I hold my breath and pray to Nell for good luck, but fortunately the AI is completely incompetent and places recons in front instead of attacking with his other units. This allows me to push forward with a well-timed hyper upgrade, and I go super aggressive, knowing that time is not on my side. Sadly, I get a little too reckless and my recon gets picked off by one of Flak's tanks, forcing a reset. This mission is really turning out every bit as brutal as I thought, because you have to find the perfect balance between pushing forward and playing defensively. And it ain't easy. On my third try, Flak's battleship decides to get annoying by targeting my rocket on the cities, which limits my firepower. Still, I am able to push through and deal a hefty amount of damage, but sadly I make the same mistake again and lose my recon. But not before I notice that Flak has a goddamn lander hidden in the reefs. Man, they really did not want the player to rout him here. If I'm going to beat this mission, I will have to set up my indirects to take out that lander. Otherwise, it is not going to work out. Attempt number 4 begins, and at this point I'm starting to get a good feel for how much I can push forward without being punished. I clear out most of Flak's initial units around my starting position, and this time I use an APC to load a mech into the mountain, which allows me to pick off the artillery in the woods. However, I spend too long on the northern section of the map, and by the time I move my forces towards Flak's lab, I just lack the firepower to clear away the final rocket hidden in the woods, once again timing me out of the mission. At this point, I have to revise my strategy a bit. It's clear that routing Flak is too difficult due to the amount of units he has hidden in the woods. So I asked myself, why don't I try capturing the lab? Flak has a lot of indirect units, sure, but they're mostly hidden in the north section of the map, away from his lab. So I instead tried to focus on pushing over the bridge to see if I can capture it in time. And it turns out that this is much easier than I first thought. As long as I drop my mech off within the rocket's minimum range, it gives me enough time to clear out the area around the lab before I start capping it with 2 days left. As Flak pops one final brute force, I hold my breath, hoping there's no hidden recons or tanks in range, and luckily there's not. With 1 day left on the timer and 0 deaths, I am able to capture the lab and claim my Neotank schematics. That was incredibly hard, and it might just be the only lab mission I attempt in this entire challenge, as they only get harder from here. But at the very least, I have my Neotanks now, and that is a very good thing. Phew! And finally, at long last, it's time to take the factory mission in Mission 8, Liberation. This time around, we can actually select our CO between Andy, Sami, and Max. I decided to give Max a go because of his high firepower. In order to beat this mission, we have to blast open a pipe seam. They have about as much durability as a Neotank. However, in this mission, Flak also starts out with a factory, which can deploy up to 3 units that can move right away. The deployment order for the factory is set for each mission, and it is different from normal to hard mode. These are the units Flak will deploy each day. It goes all the way down to day 32 before it resets and starts over. This should make the level fairly predictable because you'll always be facing the same units. However, there is a huge element of RNG to factory missions that can completely change how difficult they are. You see, every single unit that gets deployed by a factory gets 1 out of 7 randomly assigned AIs. Though these are not all equally likely to occur, but if you're lucky, most of Flak's factory units will get an AI that causes them to just kinda screw off and remain passive for most of the fight. However, if you're unlucky, they will charge straight at you, and at this point, the mission becomes impossible. So it really comes down to a good dose of luck. On my first attempt, I get very lucky, as Flak's initial units decide to guard his infantry, meaning they just follow them around as they capture properties. This means I'm free to march my infantry north across the river to go take on his northern base. If I manage to successfully capture it, I can deploy a Neotank on the base directly below the pipeline, and that's pretty much GG. Flak does have a very nasty spawn of units on day 4, however, as his factory produces a bomber, a medium tank, and an artillery. At this point, I still have not captured any of the northern bases, and it's clear I'm taking a little too long, as now I have several Flak units heading towards my position. I tried to hit him with a missile to slow them down, but it's not enough. The medium tank, bomber, and recon all close in on my HQ, and from there it's pretty much only a matter of time before I lose a unit and have to reset. So I realized Max was probably a pretty poor choice for this mission, since it's all about capping properties. So on my second try, I decided to give Sami a go. Once again, I am very lucky as Flak's initial recon and battlecopter does not charge at me, giving me time to march across the river with my infantry. I used my first missile on Flak's infantry to slow down their capture game, as this will buy me valuable time, and this proves to be much more effective. Before long, I started capturing the northern base, and even get a Neotank out on the middle one. But Flak's units are now moving towards my base in full force, spearheaded by a Neotank. I make a huge error in my build order, as I'm 900 funds short to deploy a Neotank on the base right underneath the pipe seam, which would have been a victory. Instead, I'm forced to retreat my infantry back as they get one-shot by Neotanks on planes, but sadly they can't all outrun Flak's Neotank, and once again, I'm forced to reset. The next couple of tries go way more poorly, as all of Flak's initial units get the aggressive AI, meaning they rush at me straight away. This forces me to build units in my HQ to defend against them, and this is an instant defeat since I won't have the economy to produce a Neotank in the northern base before Flak overruns me. Besides, I get one of my HHB infantry picked off by an anti-air, so I have to reset. After that follows a bunch more attempts where Flak's units once again all get the aggressive AI, so I just make it a habit to reset every time that happens, as it's just not going to work out. After multiple restarts, I get a good roll of RNG, as most of Flak's units are passively either hanging around his HQ or protecting his capping infantry. And at that point, it really is a very simple anticlimactic march over the river with Sami's infantry, capturing the northern base, deploying a Neotank, and with 0 deaths, destroy the pipeline. Man, what an incredibly stupidly designed mission. Now that we've liberated Orange Star, we can now choose freely between the missions of Blue Moon and Yellow Comet. I've always preferred going Blue Moon first, but I will be employing a cute little trick at the end of the campaigns, which I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with. The Blue Moon missions I actually think will be some of the easiest ones in this challenge, because I get to play with very strong COs and with objectives that won't change my playstyle all that much, such as in Mission 9, Tanks. In this mission, you play every Grit main's wet dream, being fortified in a defensive location with rockets and artillery everywhere, while Adder attempts to force his way through with a brigade of tanks. This mission is, as you might expect, pretty damn easy to do deathless, since all you need to do is destroy Adder's units before they can get near you, which is kind of the point to begin with. Though it's not completely without danger, as you can easily lose a stray recon if Adder spots it, so yeah, gotta be a little bit careful. Though once I figure out where to best position my units, it really is like shooting fish in a barrel. As long as I focus on the mechs, which can actually be a little dangerous, and as long as I utilize the missile silos correctly, this mission is pretty much a free win. But oh man, is it ever so much fun to play. Easily one of my favorite grit missions of all time. Up next, we are going to Olaf's hometown, and a mission I love so much I made an entire video about it. Toy Box. This mission features Olaf fighting Lash in a dystopian hellscape that was once his former hometown. And narratively speaking, it is a fantastic mission. Gameplay-wise though, it's kinda boring. The map is incredibly choke-pointy, but for this challenge, that's actually a good thing. I can exploit the AI by trapping one of Lash's recons in front of my 5 HP tank, and since it won't shoot on me in fear of being retaliated upon, it will just stay there, as it's coded to move at max distance towards enemy units. So it just ends up getting stuck here, and since this is the only place where Lash's troops can enter, I can bottleneck her entire army while I blast away at her with indirects. This isn't 100% safe though, as Lash's mechs can still dash over the mountains to pick up my rockets, so I have to play it safe. On my second attempt, I build up my indirect force much faster, and I set up a literal wall of artillery and rockets that keep blasting away at Lash's units until they build up to a critical mass. And due to the way I approached the mission, it is probably the slowest one I've played so far. I have to inch forward at a snail's pace, because Lash has many indirect units around the map, which makes it unsafe for me to approach them. And if she happens to pop her prime tactics at the wrong moment, I can easily lose a unit. This is also the chapter where you pick up the lab map, and I will probably try my hand at that next. Towards the end of this chapter, I even deploy a few battleships, as I still don't feel safe storming Lash's HQ, and in the end it takes me a grand total of 30 freaking days to beat this map with 0 losses. Surely I won't get an S rank this time around. Jesus Christ. Up next, we unlock a bunch of different missions, but I want to try my hand at the lab map, as I feel I might need Neotanks later on in this challenge. I decide to pick Colin as my CO, as his lower deployment cost will serve me nicely. I did say earlier that I thought the lab missions would become harder and harder, but that's mostly the Yellow Comet and Green Earth ones. This map is actually laughably easy. Lash has a bunch of extra pre-deployed units on hard mode, which may look a little intimidating early on, but this map is generous enough to give you 6 missile silos around your base, which is more than enough to trivialize it. On day 3, Lash clumps up a bunch of her units conveniently in time for us to launch our 2 first missiles, which leaves all her battlecopters incredibly low. Thanks to Colin's low prices, I can get 2 anti-air out in time to mop them up before they kill one of my infantry. Then it's just a matter of using my 2 initial tanks to prevent Lash from getting the neutral base, and then I can blast the units around her lab 3 times with my missiles until they all go down to 1 HP and enter repair mode. At which point it's simply a matter of transporting an infantry up to the lab with an APC and capture it. With 0 deaths, I take the lab on day 12, making this one of the easiest chapters in this challenge thus far. So now that we've successfully unlocked the second batch of maps, now might be a good time to talk about mission skipping. Every continent has a total of 8 missions, 6 regular ones, 1 secret lab map, and a factory level, which you need to beat to clear the campaign. The factory level is unlocked when you beat 4 out of the 6 normal missions. This means you can skip 2 for each continent after Orange Star, the lab map not included. I can therefore be a bit strategic in deciding which ones I want to play and which ones I want to skip. An obvious one to skip is 2 weak tests. In this mission, Colin has to survive against a superior Lash bombarding him for 14 days. And normally, this is one of the most trivial missions you can play in the game, since you can just delete your starting army and wait 14 turns in a row since the AI is too dumb to capture your HQ. But sadly, deleting a unit counts as a loss, so that's not possible in this challenge. Therefore, I decide to skip it, and I instead decide to try out the second Olaf mission, T-15. And oh boy, that proved to be a huge mistake. In this mission, you play as Olaf, and you have to capture a bunch of cities surrounding a giant missile within 15 days. This alone wouldn't be so bad, but you're up against Flak and his random luck damage, which is annoying as hell. But that's not actually the reason why this mission is so hard. You see, you start out with several large pre-deployed armies on the map, but in the bottom part, you have a very small army consisting of 2 mechs, 3 anti-airs, and a rocket, separated from your other 2 armies by a pipe seam. And Flak has a death squad of 4 bombers and 4 battlecopters headed straight for them. Now, since you only start with 3 anti-air, it doesn't matter if all 3 of them get the first strike on Flak's bombers. They will all take some counterattack damage back, and then one of them will be finished off by the 4th healthy bomber. I do everything I can to try and save the bottom group, like placing a missile in range to help out, but all it can really do is shooting down a single battlecopter, so that doesn't really solve anything. On this map, you do get some help from Andy, who arrives with a few pre-deployed air units, but he's on the other side of the map and can't really do anything to help the bottom group. I tried several times to beat this map, but I actually don't think there is a way to do it deathless. I cannot break through the southern pipe seam in time to rescue the bottom squad, so I have to throw in the towel here and move on. After getting my butt pounded by Flak, I feel like taking on one of the easier missions in the Blue Moon mission in Reclamation. A fairly standard battle where you get to use Colin against Lash. This map features an incredibly annoying laser cannon that makes it tough for your initial units to advance, and a single misstep means a restart. But just like in the previous map where we faced one of these monstrosities, this laser cannon can be cleverly used against Lash as well. And once I get my units past the initial hurdle, it actually becomes more helpful as it even interrupts Lash's captures. My game plan for this mission is quite simple. Capture the southern airport and spam cheap battlecopters to harass Lash. She does actually start out with an anti-air on the hard mode version of this map, but it's locked into a stationary AI, meaning it will only move if units come close to it. So as long as you dance around its range, it's absolutely harmless. The second objective of this map is to secure the missile silos before Lash can get to them. And once I take the western base, it becomes quite easy to stall out Lash's forces as I build up my cash to ludicrous levels. Why am I doing this, you may ask? Well, isn't it obvious? Just because I'm doing a challenge doesn't mean I'm not allowed to have a little fun. Say hello to 225% increased firepower. Ah, just look at these delicious numbers. Fair and balanced, everyone. Now, even though power of money is not the real reason why Colin is so broken, it is probably one of the most fun superpowers to play around with. Everyone has done this at some point during the campaign, and those who claim not to are liars. After 30 days of playing around with Lash, I beat the map with 0 losses. And at this point, it's not even funny anymore how lenient this game is on its S-rank requirements. Up next is a mission I was going to skip in favor of T-15, but now I realize I have to do it. Mission 13, Nature Walk. This is the second Grit mission, and it is not one of my favorites. On this map, Grit has to beat Lash in a race to his own HQ by moving his forces through 3 black cannons barring his way. And because of this, he has to use the forests as cover, hence the title Nature Walk. I always thought this was a strange mission for Grit, because his indirects are kinda at a disadvantage here. Rockets are not very good at moving through woods, and the fact that you have to race Lash means that setting up to shoot just slows you down. I would have personally taken Olaf's global damage over Grit's extra range on this mission anytime. I think the idea behind using Grit for this mission is that he's better at picking off the black cannons, but I never bother to destroy those anyway, because once you get close enough to shoot on them, you're usually past their range of fire anyway, so they become a non-issue at that point. The big problem with this mission is that Lash starts capturing your HQ at day 13, and takes it on day 14 if you don't interrupt it. So you are on a timer. You do start with a lot of rockets and artillery, but if you stop too much to fire, then Lash's infantry will run away from you, so you have to find a good balance between moving forward and setting up to shoot. At first, this seems rather easy, but the real problem starts when you reach the halfway point, as Lash has a ton of units hidden in the woods everywhere, and if a single one of my units gets spotted, that's pretty much a guaranteed restart. I try multiple attempts at inching my units through the woods, but it always ends the same way. I run into a unit in the woods, and that unit gets picked off immediately, making this mission feel a lot more like just rolling the dice as opposed to being actually careful. After several failed attempts, I decide to try a different strategy. Since the objective of this mission is just to have a single one of my units touch the HQ, I decide to keep my entire army around my starting position and just use it to blast away at Lash's approaching units, while a single sneaky infiltration tank stealths through the left side woods where Lash doesn't have that many units, and to my surprise, it works beautifully. The tank is able to sneak its way all the way up to the HQ, and with 0 units lost, I'm just able to win this mission on day 8. Nature walk? More like cakewalk. At long last, we've unlocked the Blue Moon factory level, but as I teased earlier, we won't be doing that right now. We are instead heading over to Yellow Comet, and this will make sense later. Let's start off with what I assume will be a free win. In Mission 14, Silo Scramble. In this mission, you play as the Emperor himself, Kambai, and you have to race flak to the missile silos in the center of the map. And this mission isn't really much more difficult on hard mode at all. Flak has some additional starting battlecopters and some pre-deployed submarines for some reason, as if you'd ever buy naval units as Kambai. Speaking of Kambai, he is absolutely broken in this game. What the hell were the developers thinking, giving him 30% firepower and defense? Playing as Kambai feels like you're using cheat codes, but for a challenge like this, I'll take any help I can get. Now, of course, Flak still does have his luck damage, which would be bothersome for any other CO, but due to the way defense hard counters luck in this game, this map is just a complete cakewalk. All I need to do is use APCs to reach the missile silos in time, which is easy to do since the AI is stupid, and with them I can just blast away Flak's troops, and there's very little he can do to pose a threat to me. I just roll over him with my tanks and put them on top of his bases, and on day 20, with 0 deaths, I take out his last submarine with a rocket. Kambai is victorious. Up next, it's time for Sensei's Return, one of my favorite Yellow Comet missions in the campaign. On this map, you play as Sensei against Adder in a fog of war match where air units are really made to shine, as most of the landmass is extremely narrow. Normally, this mission is super fun to play as Sensei is mega broken, but the problem with the battlecopter commander in this challenge is that at any time, Adder can pop out of the woodworks with an anti-air and force a reset, which means I am forced to rely on scouting properly with recons before I can make any progress. In the hard campaign version of this map, Adder begins with 2 pre-deployed cruisers, which can be a little scary, but they are far enough apart to where you can easily take them out individually with Sensei's busted battlecopters. His ability to spawn infantry with his powers is also amazing for speeding up the capture rate of the various islands around the map, and it's quite easy to beat Adder to most of the contested properties with your boosted transports. I realized that pressing forward on land is a bad idea, as it's too risky and I'm just gonna run into some indirects or anti-air. So I instead plonk down 2 medium tanks in a choke point and let Adder run his troops into them while I build up a critical mass of battlecopters and bombers in the north, with the plan being an all-out airborne assault on his HQ. Adder does have some pre-deployed missiles and anti-air posted in various regions of this map, so it's important to rely on recons hidden in the woods to know where they are so I can put my battlecopters just outside their range. And then, with a well-timed CO power, which boosts the firepower of my copters to a ridiculous plus 75%, I swoop in with a huge air force and paradrop some infantry near Adder's HQ, though I underestimate the defenses of his anti-air units and would probably have lost a unit had the AI not foolishly decided to join them together instead of attacking me. On the last turn, Adder gets a very scary superpower, and I fear he's gonna bring some anti-air up from the woods to kill one of my air units, but luckily that doesn't happen. However, I reach the HQ and start capturing it just in time as Adder begins blasting my southern medium tanks with indirect fire. And on day 22, with 0 losses, I capture Adder's HQ and score a victory for the old man. Up next is my definite favorite Yellow Comet mission of all time, A Mirror Darkly. On this map, you control Sonya, and you get to mercilessly bully Lash with tons of indirect units as she's trying to force her way through a narrow mountain pass with a huge army. This mission might seem like a free win in a deathless run, but it's still easy to lose a unit if you're careless. You also start with a few units inside the mountain range itself, but those can be easily hidden within forests and should be safe as all of Lash's units are hard-coded to go straight for your HQ. The trick to this map is to know which of Lash's units you have to prioritize. Since you begin with 2 medium tanks, one of which can block your HQ, you can pretty much ignore any unit not capable of dealing damage to it. That means you should focus enemy Neotanks and medium tanks as much as possible. But you don't actually need to kill them. As long as they are on 6 HP or below, the AI won't take engagements against your medium tanks and properties as it doesn't view it as cost effective, meaning they'll just hang around your HQ without doing anything, letting your own medium tanks take free shots at them. Also, one thing that playing competitive Advanced Wars has taught me is just how garbage Lash's superpower is. Noobs always think that Prime Tactics is amazing because it doubles defense stars, which just seems crazy good. But compared to other superpowers, it's just incredibly underwhelming. The extra defense is only really felt when Lash is on properties, and there aren't that many of those around, nor does the AI take advantage of it at all. Also, gaining defense stars is a lot worse than just gaining passive defense, as terrain stars is reduced by a unit's HP, so unless a Lash unit is on full health, the defense might not even always factor in. It is still a little annoying as Lash will get some extra movement, but most of the time it's not really a power you need to worry yourself with. Towards the end, it does get a little scary as Lash absolutely surrounds my HQ, and I'm kinda worried my artillery and rocket might get picked off, but for the most part, they're pretty safe. This mission is always so much fun to play, and I absolutely love it, and turns out it's pretty easy to do deathless as well, as long as you position Sonya's indirects carefully and don't have them picked off. On day 13, I end the map with 0 losses and get an easy S rank. Man, if only Sonya was this good in competitive Advanced Wars. Up next, we have 3 missions remaining before we unlock the factory level, but we only have to beat 1 of them, so that means we can skip 2. The first one I'm skipping is Showstopper. It's not particularly hard and I might be able to do it deathless, but it's just an incredibly tedious mission that takes ages to complete, seeing as you have to destroy 8 mini-cannons and Adder has tons of units hidden in the fog, so I'm just gonna skip that. I'm also not keen on doing foul play, as while it's not an incredibly difficult mission, it does force me to play defense with Sensei against a huge Adder army, and that just doesn't seem very fun when I'm going deathless. So I instead opt to go for Duty and Honor, which features combat with a large pre-deployed army attempting to rescue 10 cities from being captured by Adder. This map also features 2 laser cannons, which will hinder your progress, but they are only prototypes, meaning they fire every other day, on days 3, 5, 7, etc. So you have to time your advance carefully to avoid getting your units shredded. Taking out the laser cannons is not hard as long as you move your units wisely, but the problem is that when you start approaching the area where your cities are located, Adder has a huge welcoming committee of indirect units ready to greet you, as well as medium tanks and Neotanks. And while Combi's units are certainly strong, they're not able to punch through that army fast enough without Adder scoring a kill, so I have to restart. My second attempt goes a little bit better. I'm able to get most of my units close to the bridge, but even as I pop a perfect Samurai Spirit and spearhead the attack with my medium tank, Adder still has enough focus fire to bring it down even though it has 60% increased defense. I realized that I'm rushing ahead too quickly as I have to allow the rest of my army time to catch up, as the only way I'll be able to break through Adder's units is a powerful push supported by rockets. And on my third try, that's exactly what I tried to do, but Adder simply captures my cities before I can get there. So I find myself stuck in this awkward position where I lose if I rush too fast, but I also lose if I'm too slow. What follows next are several attempts where I'm almost able to make it through every time, but towards the end, Adder always seems able to pick off a weakened unit, and it is frustrating beyond measure. This mission is simply too tight on time, and there's too many objectives for me to do. I have to divert fire to deal with both laser cannons, and I have to move my medium tanks perfectly ahead to make sure they make it in time, and I also need my rockets to support them if I want to break through Adder's choke point. And if I place even one unit slightly wrong, it gets picked off and I lose. All while I'm pressed for time as Adder captures my cities incredibly fast thanks to his movement boosting powers. I gotta hand it to this mission, it nearly broke me. I contemplated giving up and trying one of the others, but stubborn as I was, I kept ramming my head into it until something amazing happened. At first, it seemed like a failed attempt, as I wasn't able to kill much of anything with my push, but then I realized that this is exactly what I needed to do. I was so focused on killing stuff that I forgot that sometimes the AI's own massive units can work against it. By intentionally not killing off units, but rather leaving them damaged, I was able to make the AI cluster its weakened units up in such a way that none of them were really able to do anything. And through sheer luck, it seemed, I was able to get an attempt where every single one of my units survived as Adder was not focus firing them. And due to this, I was finally able to position a medium tank on one of my remaining city, preventing it from being captured at the very last moment. At this point, the mission was won, and all I had to do was clean up the remainder of Adder's units. I still have no idea how I pulled it off, but on day 14, and with no losses, I was able to claim my victory. Holy shit, what a mission. And finally, we unlocked the Yellow Comet factory level, and I decided to go with the power team of Konbai and Max. This factory level is interesting because the pipeline is pretty far away from the factory, but it is well protected by several mini cannons, so it's going to be rough to break through here. But what is even more unique about this mission is that 2 out of Adder's 3 factory slots are in the water, meaning they can only produce naval and air units. This is interesting because if you remember how factories work, they assign random AIs to various units, and on day 1, the factory produces a battleship and a transport copter. And while the copter will always move away, the battleship has a small chance of spawning with a passive AI, meaning it pretty much just sits quietly in front of the factory, blocking every single left side spawn for the rest of the map. This alone makes the mission so much more manageable, so I decide to reset until the battleship gets that passive AI, meaning I will have far less units to deal with. And this happens as early as my second try, so I get kinda lucky. Once I've successfully blocked off 1/3 of Adder's factory units, the game plan is to use Konbai's forces in the south to keep the bulk of Adder's forces busy, while Max builds up a critical force of bombers and battlecopters to take down Adder's defenses around the pipeline. However, as I very quickly learned, the margin for error is slim here, as Adder's annoying movement boosting powers means his units can often move much farther than expected and take down one of my units, forcing a reset. So I have to be careful, at least with Max. Konbai, on the other hand, is so damn overpowered that none of Adder's units really pose a threat to him at all. I'm even capable of holding his forces off with minimal effort, and even have funds to spare to deploy a few naval units to help Max out, which is kind of incredible. In fact, Konbai is so broken on this map that I don't even feel the need to activate Samurai Spirit most of the time. Morale boost gives me the firepower I need to destroy Adder, so I just pop that over and over again. It's still a risky mission, as Max faces a lot of scary units on his side, like anti-air and fighters spawning from the factory, but eventually I am able to get enough bombers in range of the pipeline so I can pop Max Blast and move in for the kill. On day 22, and with 0 deaths, I destroy the pipeline and liberate Yellow Comet. From one factory level and straight to another, it's finally time to take on the Blue Moon final mission, Factory Blues. And it's time to show you guys why I held off on clearing this mission for so long. You see, beating the Yellow Comet campaign first allows you to choose Yellow Comet COs for player 2. And since this player starts out with a small pre-deployed army, this allows me to pick Konbai, which will give me a huge boost to my starting strength. And turns out this is very much needed, because this mission is easily the hardest map of this Deathless run so far. Lasha's pipeline is in a very defensible location, and she has a factory churning out ground units at an insane pace. But maybe worst of all is that the map is covered in woods, and Lasha's powers are very well suited for taking advantage of this. For some reason, she actually pops her normal power terrain tactics a lot in this map, which is something she almost never does anywhere else. I have to think that she has some kind of unique AI, because it happened so many times. This is normally not that big a deal, but on this map, it's an absolute pain to deal with, because every time Lash pops her normal or superpower, her units can move over all terrain at no cost. And this causes reset after reset after reset after reset. In the end, I stopped counting how many times I lost a unit and had to restart the map, but it must have been at least 10 times or more. Even with Konbai's insane 30% stronger units protecting the Blue Moon troops, it's just so easy for Lash to wheel around with her fast units and take out a weak infantry or tank. And the factory churns out so many units on hard mode that ambush you that even approaching it will just make you lose instantly. At first, I try out my normal strategy, which involves Konbai rushing the leftmost airport with Grit setting up a line of artillery, but I quickly learned that Grit is completely useless for this challenge, as Lash can very easily take out his infantry and artillery with her fast fast recons and anti-air. So I decided to give Colin a try instead, with no better luck. I have access to Neotanks with Blue Moon, so the idea is that I try to churn them out fast with Colin's deployment reduction, but the problem is that his other units are just too weak to go safely up against Lash. While Combine may stave her off for a bit, he's not going to hold out forever against Lash's onslaught of Neotanks and rockets, and the missiles are another huge problem on this map. I really don't want Lash to reach them, as she'll start to shave off HP of Combi's troops, which I really need to be on full health, but trying to seize them for myself is dangerous as they are incredibly close to Lash's factory. After countless resets and a lot of frustration, I decide to swap out the Blue Moon CO again, this time to Olaf, as I figure his snow and global damage will be very good at slowing down Lash, which is something I really need for this map. And this actually works out kinda decently. Winter Fury is very nice on this map, but sadly it doesn't come in often enough to deal with Lash's incredible factory spam. Normally it's not too hard to outproduce her with a sea of units and eventually block the factory, but in this challenge, infantry walls are just not safe to utilize, and it's incredibly hard to go up against Lash's units without losing any of your own. Attempting to take the western airport also goes poorly, as this is too close to the factory reinforcements, and even Combi's units will be wiped out eventually if they don't have any backup. So I have to change up my strategy by sending Combi's units into the middle. And while Combi does his best to keep Lash's forces busy, I can send Olaf's infantry to the east to capture the other neutral airport, which is much farther away from the factory. From here, my plan is to build a bomber and attempt to take out the pipeline before Lash overwhelms me. And this becomes a tight race against the clock, as I have to do a full retreat back to my HQ to avoid having Lash run me over. Just look how many units she ends up getting towards the end. I cannot safely deal with this. As Olaf's bomber nears the pipeline, I pray to Nell that Lash won't deploy an anti-air in her eastern base. But I forget that on day 21, the factory actually produces a fighter unit, which ends up taking out one of my battlecopters, forcing a reset. So I have to do the whole thing over again. And this time I still try the same strategy, but at this point I'm starting to really know how to optimize it, so it goes a lot better. Still, the end result is mostly the same. Around day 20, Lash starts to seriously overwhelm me with her forces, and I have to do a full-on retreat back to my HQ and box my units together, hoping that she won't take me out. I am even forced to pop Olaf's Blizzard as Lash's Prime Tactics is about to come in, which will spell doom for the units I have around my HQ. And I even have to pop Morale Boost with Combine just to make sure his units stay alive, as they are all incredibly low on HP at this point. The bomber gets one shot off the pipeline, and on day 22, with 0 units lost, and Lash actually deploying that anti-air, I get off the second shot and beat the map. This was easily the toughest challenge of this run so far, and I spent several hours with all the attempts combined. But in the end, I was able to beat it. I can only hope the Green Earth missions aren't as bad as this. At long last, it's finally time to embark on the Green Earth campaign, which has some of my favorite missions of all time. I decided to start things out with a classic in Mission 20, Sinking Feeling, which features Jess attempting to sink 9 of Lash's battleships before 17 days are through. This map is interesting as it starts out as a pre-deployed mission, but there are bases you can capture to deploy units. There is a lab map located on the Western Isles, but it requires you to build a lander to get to it, so I'm going to ignore it as Green Earth's lab mission is incredibly difficult. Timed missions are always a bit tricky in this Deathless challenge, since you can't just turtle your way through the missions. But the way I choose to approach it doesn't change drastically from what I usually do. I just have to play it a bit more careful. On hard mode, Lash has a pretty scary army heading your way with 2 Neotanks in close proximity to one another, so it's important to abuse the AI's move order to ensure the lighter units like tanks and anti-air clog up the space in front of my choke points so I can bathe Lash's units in artillery fire. And conveniently, I'm also able to deploy a battleship on day 3 to help me out with this job. With a well-timed overdrive, I am able to wipe out most of Lash's initial units before her Prime Tactics can come in, but sadly I mess up and place an injured medium tank in range of one of her rockets, so I have to reset. The second try goes a little bit better, though I take a bit more time with my units and the clock is ticking down at an alarming rate. I am able to deny Lash's eastern base easily enough, which prevents her from deploying reinforcements, but at this point she's captured an airport and starts producing a lot of battlecopters and eventually bombers, which can be very scary. So I have to produce a cruiser to help keep my battleships safe. The map is definitely all about finding a balance between pushing forward and not being too reckless, as once you get your indirects into position, the battleships will start sinking very quickly. This is exacerbated by the fact that Lash will start joining them together when they are on low health, so it's important to spread your fire out evenly when targeting them to optimize this process. Overall, the mission is not that hard once you get past the initial hurdle. You have a lot more time than you think to sink the battleships, so it's important not to panic even when the days tick down to the single digits. On day 16, and with 0 losses, I clean up the last battleship to claim my victory. Up next, I decide to tackle Drake's Dilemma, one of the weirdest and most broken missions in the game. On this map, you play as Drake, who has his navy surrounded by Hawk in the center of the map, but you do get some assistance from Emperor Combi down in the south, although I never really find that he does anything. Your objective here is to destroy the 2 black cannons, but the trick is to reach them without being picked off by Hawk's massive army, consisting of tons of artillery and rockets. However, you might be wondering why I say this mission is broken. Well, it's kinda just very strangely coded. Kartal made a video showing off how many weird things you can do here. For one, Hawk does not have an HQ of his own, but even weirder is that the map doesn't end if Hawk conquers Yellow Comet's HQ, and if you'd manage to take it back, you actually get 2 HQs at once, which is really funny. Furthermore, the AI of Hawk's units are a complete mess. They keep moving back and forth like they're drunk. This entire mission is just a complete trash can, and I have no idea what the devs were even thinking when they made it. But none of that really matters here. My strategy for this mission is quite simple. I move only my battleships down south, using the cover of the reefs to avoid the black cannons and Hawk's rockets. The black cannons are of the sort that only fires every other day, so they shoot on days 1, 3, 5, etc. I can use this to my advantage to get a bit of extra momentum. Hawk has no naval units of his own initially, so the submarines, cruisers, and landers don't really serve much of a purpose at all. I told you this mission was broken. So I just placed them carefully in range of Hawk's rockets to build my power charge. Global damage won't do much against Hawk since he heals it right back up with his powers, but I can still drain his fuel with Tsunami. And since Hawk has so many units forced to travel massive distances and almost no capture properties or APCs, I can ensure most of his army will just be stuck and unable to move after a couple of tsunamis. And that's exactly what happens. His entire army just kinda runs out of fuel and just stands around doing nothing. It's kinda hilarious, really. Combat doesn't even have to do anything. This allows me to cruise behind his black cannons with my battleships, and on day 8, with no losses, I take down one black cannon, then the other, and I win. What an incredibly dumb map. And then we come to one of my favorite missions of all time, Sea Fortress. On this map, you control a huge pre-deployed air force with Eagle, and the objective is to smash 9 minicannons surrounding a giant fortress, but Hawk has prepared for your arrival and deployed tons of anti-air units. This mission may look incredibly challenging to do deathless, but it's actually not as bad as you might think. The first thing I do is to move all my forces forward to meet Hawk's initial air force. In the hard mode version of this map, you actually start with some naval units, and that allows me to load 4 battlecopters into the cruisers in order to protect them from Hawk's global damage. It's not much, but every little bit helps. Dealing with Hawk's initial units is simple as long as you try to take effective engagements. Even with minus 30% firepower, Eagle's cruisers do really well against Hawk's fighters since they take 0 damage back. And generally speaking, you want to ensure that every engagement you make are with units incapable of being retaliated on, such as your fighters against Hawk's battlecopters. Once you take down all of his fighters, you can use your own bombers to shield your remaining units from Hawk's battlecopters, as they can't target them. You will of course inevitably face a black storm, there's nothing you can do about this. Around 4 HP of global damage will be dealt to your army over the course of this battle, and you just kinda have to trooper through. Though you can take your time and move slowly into position, and that's exactly what I do as I bring my battleship up to siege the frontal minicannons. Eagle's ships are awful, and even more so when they're damaged, but they still destroy the minicannons in 4 shots, so I can take down a good chunk of them while the rest of my air force prepares for a lightning strike. Eagle's reduced fuel consumption is actually amazing here. Normally, it's a part of his day-to-day that you tend to completely overlook, but burning 2 less units of fuel per day on your fighters and bombers buys you so much more time in a mission like this. I would say it would be impossible to do for any other CO. Once I take down the frontal mini-cannons, I have to bait Hawk's remaining cruisers, and this proves challenging since he has missiles everywhere. But there is a type of unit he does not have, and those are rockets. So I start by bringing my cruiser in to block his, and thus I can move my bombers into such a position where they can destroy the cruisers without taking damage. I actually start to run dangerously low on fuel towards the end of the mission, so I end up combining a few of my bombers together to create full health ones, as that allows me fresh bombers that can one-shot the mini-cannons. And once all my forces are finally in position, I attack with everything I have. I nearly take out every single mini-cannon without even having to pop Lightning Strike, but one remains, so I have to activate it. But I'm still pretty happy with how this mission turns out. On day 17, with 0 losses, I eliminate the final mini-cannon and claim my victory. Amusingly, this turned out to be one of the easiest missions of the challenge. It just took a long time to pull off. With 3 missions remaining, we can now pick one of them to unlock the final factory mission. I'm deciding to skip POW the Rescue since it features Eagle having to save a small force led by Sammy who is surrounded by a massive army with 4 laser cannons on all sides, so yeah, screw that. The second mission I'm putting the skips on is Rain of Fire. This mission isn't particularly difficult, I just think it's incredibly boring. I hate volcano maps, so that means the only natural choice left is Navy versus Air. And this is a mission I really like, at least in theory. On this map you control Drake, and you are forced to use naval units against Hawk's superior air force. And this is a pretty damn cool concept that I can really get behind. I'm a sucker for naval units, and I think it's a cool idea that you have to fight at such a massive disadvantage, since air units are pretty much superior in every way. The issue I have with this map is that you can just attack via the landmass in the center, eliminating the need for naval units altogether. It would have been so much better if this was an island map without airports. However, I'm still going to play this map as it was intended, focusing heavily on naval units to dominate. Not because I want a meme, but because it's actually the best way to approach this map. Hawk has a very scary air force coming at you right away, consisting of several bombers and battlecopters, and cruisers are not very good at dealing with air units. Even when I place them on harbors, a Hawk bomber and battlecopter can still take a single cruiser out even with Drake's boosted defense. Seriously, who thought it was a good idea to nerf his ship's defenses down to 10% in Advanced Wars 2, as if being a naval commander isn't already bad enough? I take a few tries to perfect the opener of this map, utilizing my anti-air and missiles to the best of my ability, and it's actually pretty hard to pull this off without losing a single unit. Finally, after several defeats, I'm able to come up with a strategy that just barely saves me from losing a unit, and after that the map kinda slows to a crawl. Hawk doesn't have much in the way of income or bases, so after his initial air units are gone, this becomes a very stally match. There are lots of missile silos spread around the map, which I can use to slow his capture game, making it impossible for him to claim any properties of note. At this point, I am free to advance through the map and build up a critical force of battleships and cruisers supported by a ground army, and I'm able to lock down most of his airports. The only one I can't reach is the northern one, as Hawk often has several bombers there. But I don't really need to worry about it. As long as my cruisers are on the edge of their range, they can usually take them out just fine. I also make sure to always pop my Typhoon after Hawk is done popping his Black Storm, so I at least get some benefit out of the power. And slowly, but surely, I wear down Hawk's defenses and go for his HQ. On day 26, with 0 losses, I capture it to claim my victory, and score a perfect 300-point S rank. Blow me down? What the fuck, Drake? At long last, it is time for the grand finale of the Green Earth campaign, Great Sea Battle. In this mission you can pick 3 COs against Hawk, and I decide to go with Drake, Sami, and Sensei. I'll explain why in a bit. This is an absolutely massive map, mostly filled with water, but Hawk has a ton of black cannons and mini cannons everywhere, which makes it hard to move around. His factory is far out of the way, but it spawns some absolutely terrifying units, and trying to overpower him conventionally is not a viable strategy. Luckily, his southern pipeline is quite isolated, and the mission of the Yellow Comet CO is to break it with rockets, while the other 2 attempts to hold off Hawk as long as possible. The reason why I picked Drake is because fuel draining is insane on this map. It is so big, and Hawk has tons of air units which are at the risk of crashing. And furthermore, there is a huge error with the AI script when it comes to APCs and refueling. You see, the AI is coded to move its transports last, but if a unit is low on fuel, the AI will place them adjacent to an APC to refuel them, only to have the APC move away from those units in the same turn. This means that Hawk's fighters and bombers are stuck attempting to follow his own APCs around to no avail, resulting in a lot of them crashing, which is why Drake is so good on this map. His global damage is once again eliminated by Hawk's own powers, but draining half the fuel of every single unit on the map will result in a lot of Hawk's units being forced to move back and forth and eventually crashing, which eases the pressure on Sami and Drake. My reason for picking Sami as the Orange Star CO is simple. I'll mostly be using infantry and indirects to hold off Hawk's units, and I also find it nice that his Black Wave can't interrupt her captures, so I figured she was the best choice. As for my choice of Sensei for Yellow Comet, his improved transport range means he can more easily reach the Eastern Island with his lander, which will allow me to capture the base and build a rocket faster. As the map starts, I play it like I always do. Drake's job is to get some ships out and fire a missile at the mechs on the Eastern Island, delaying its capture of the base. Meanwhile, Sami just captures properties and builds up a force of indirect units, while Sensei uses his lander to transport his infantry directly to the Eastern Island. I get very lucky on my first attempt, as Hawk's 2 initial factory bombers gets assigned the Guard AI, meaning they just follow his infantry around as they capture properties. This makes the map a lot easier, as when the bombers charge directly at you, it can be very tough to deal with them. This buys me a lot of time to prepare my defenses as Sensei's infantry lands on the eastern shores. I start to think that the mission will be an absolute cakewalk, but I forget that I also have to defeat the southern Black Cannon before I can advance on the pipeline. And with Sensei's minus 10% firepower, this means his rockets take the cannon down in 3 shots as opposed to 2, meaning I have to spend a lot more time. And Hawk's units are starting to amass around his northern Black Cannon to a scary degree. As Drake's battleship starts to arrive, I'm able to lay down some covering fire to help Sami out, but Hawk's units are still building up by the day, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm going to be alright. The first tsunami comes in and it's absolutely devastating, leading 2 of Hawk's bombers to crash. He is of course able to heal the damage right back up with a Black Wave, but the fuel drain was the whole reason I picked Drake to begin with. I do have to reset the map a couple of times as Hawk is able to pick off enemy units here and there. It is extremely tough to have to constantly check the ranges of all of his units, including a bunch of black cannons, and I find myself getting fatigued doing this for extended periods of time, forcing me to take some breaks. I launch every missile I have at his forces in an attempt to slow them down, but it's simply not enough. I am on the clock and I need to hurry up. As Hawk starts to send fighters my way, I realize that my battlecopters are in danger, and for the second time in this challenge, I utilize the cruiser's ability to load them in, hiding them from their range. Even so, I realize that it's only going to be a matter of time before I lose a unit. And to make matters worse, Hawk is now sending bombers towards Sensei, and with his minus 10% firepower on anti-air, you really struggle going up against them. As I finally begin to lay siege to the mini-cannon in Hawk's pipeline, the absolute worst thing imaginable happens, as his factory spawns out a pair of rockets capable of shooting the turn they come out, and thus he manages to take out one of my infantry in their range. I actually shut down my emulator in frustration when this happened, which is why the clip ends so abruptly. But I'm not about to give up yet. I start over again, this time determined to not make any stupid mistakes. And I stay the course all the way to the end, where I manage to get my rockets in range of Hawk's pipeline, and on day 18, with 0 losses, I finally blast it open to claim my victory. That was a lot harder than I thought it would be. Maybe not as hard as Factory Blues, but definitely the second hardest challenge of this run so far. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we've nearly reached the end of this challenge, and with only 2 missions left, this is the one that I've been dreading since the start. Mission 25, Hot Pursuit. For this map, we can select 3 COs, and there's no doubt who I'm going for here. Kumbai, Olaf, and Drake. Maximum global damage cheese initiated. In this map, you have to destroy 3 black cannons, but guarding them is a huge pre-deployed force led by none other than Sturm himself. He is absolutely ridiculous in Advanced Wars 2. His units can move perfectly through terrain, and they have 20% extra firepower and defense. His Meteor Strike is also incredibly deadly in a challenge like this, as it deals 8 damage to units in a blob, making it very easy for me to have them picked off. For this challenge, knowing how the meteor works is essential, and I made an entire video explaining it if you want to check it out. To quickly summarize it, there are 3 different meteors which can spawn. There's an HP meteor, a value meteor, and an indirect meteor. The HP meteor just cares about doing HP damage, it doesn't care about the value of units it hits. The value meteor wants to try and destroy as much combined funds as possible, while the indirect meteor does the same, but it treats all indirect units as being worth twice the value. I already have a plan in mind to manipulate the meteor, which you'll see later. This mission is incredibly rough, because Sturm's forces will hit you extremely hard, and the player in the center is the one who has to do the heavy lifting, which is why Kombai is so amazing for this job. On properties, his units have an astounding 60% increased defense, which means even his infantry can tank Sturm's Neotanks. The job of Olaf and Drake is to try and hold out against Sturm's flank and eventually build up enough power charge to hit him with a double global damage superpower, taking away 4 HP from his entire army, at which point the rest of the mission should be more manageable. But the trouble is getting there. Due to his ability to move through terrain, Sturm's forces will be upon you much quicker than you might think in this mission. But I discovered that just like in Advanced Wars 1, it is possible to use Sturm's own massive units against him. By just constantly reinforcing and joining Kombai's units together on the front lines, I am able to bunch up Sturm's units in the center of the map where most of them can't even attack me, effectively rendering them useless. Meanwhile, on each flank, Olaf and Drake has to do their absolute best to wait up the storm and build up their forces. Time is definitely on the player's side in this mission, as Sturm does not start with a single base under his control. As long as you can prevent him from taking one, this means that every unit you destroy is gone permanently, effectively meaning you have to stall your way to victory. One of the many things I do to slow Sturm down is to use a transport copter on Olaf's side to draw his forces onto the small half island. But this only gets me around 1 to 2 extra turns, as Sturm's battleships and cruiser are fast approaching. Over on Drake's side, I have to deal with a very scary medium tank coming in to threaten my initial forces. And soon enough, I will have to completely evacuate my base, as Sturm's battleships will soon be arriving at my harbor. At this point, it is a waiting game, as I slowly build up my forces on either side, while Kombai does his absolute best to reinforce the center. But this won't hold forever, as Sturm has artillery on the way, and once they arrive, it's going to be much harder for Kombai's forces to survive. But that's not the worst part. Sturm's power meter, while extremely big, fills up fast when he's fighting 3 COs at once, and soon I'll be forced to deal with the very first meteor strike. So I decide to take a big gamble that the meteor will be an indirect one instead of an HP one. Thus, I make a formation in Kombai's base consisting of a rocket and a bunch of artillery, which should keep the meteor from striking the front line. And turns out, it works beautifully. Of course, the meteor is only half the problem. Sturm's forces are now boosted up to a terrifying 40% firepower in defense, meaning I have to play super safe. And during this turn, my units pretty much can't scratch his. Amazingly enough, I survived the turn. But now, Sturm's artillery is in position to shell me, meaning my job suddenly got a lot harder. As Sturm's second meteor strike is about to come in, Kombai's Samurai Spirit is also ready, and it couldn't have come in at a better time. I pop Samurai Spirit to give my units and properties an absolutely insane 90% defense boosts, and then Drake rolls in with a Typhoon that cripples Sturm's forces and drains half their fuel. Have you ever seen global damage looking better than this? I sure haven't. As Olaf's turn rolls in though, I realize I'm just short of a Winter Fury, and while I attempt to build up my power meter, it's simply not enough, so I have to pray that Kombai's Samurai Spirit will see him through this turn. As Sturm prepares his second meteor, it miraculously strikes my indirect blob once again, and thanks to Kombai's insane defenses, his units hold, buying enough time for Olaf to roll in with his Winter Fury, further crippling Sturm's forces with another delicious 2 HP of global damage. Not to mention it slows Sturm down by a lot. Many people are confused by Sturm's CO dossier, which claims he's weak in the snow. This doesn't mean Sturm suffers any additional penalties while it's snowing, it just means he's as slow as other COs when the snow rolls in. Still, it is nice, as it is the only thing in the game capable of slowing him down. With 4 HP of global damage and Kombai's forces holding on for dear life, the rest of Sturm's army crumbles, and once I mop up the majority of his forces, it is just a matter of sending bombers in to take out the black cannons. Olaf is the first to destroy his on the right side, and eventually Drake gets the cannon on the left side as well. And on day 24, with 0 losses, I make it snow for cinematic effect and take out the central and last black cannon to claim my victory. That was an absolutely epic battle. At long last, it's time for the final obstacle in my path. For my 3 final COs, I'm going with a team of Grit, Andy, and Eagle. And with that, I embark on my last challenge. It's time for the final front. The objective of this map is the same in hard mode as it is in normal mode. You have to destroy the giant laser cannon, which fires every 7 days in a cone, dealing 80 damage to all units caught in its path, except for Sturm's own units. This map also features 2 black cannons, but they're the north-facing kind, which only fires every other day. This map looks kinda intimidating at first glance, but it's actually a bit of a joke. The reason is that Sturm just doesn't start with that many units, and the map is absolutely huge, which is a detriment to the AI, because it's really bad at doing battle on multiple fronts. It just doesn't know how to utilize all of its bases, leading to some of the fronts just collapsing as they get neglected. In a normal run, this map feels very lackluster and hardly poses a challenge at all, but for this Deathless challenge, it's actually insanely difficult. It might have been the biggest challenge I've had so far. Sturm is just a terrifying foe with his high movement, offense and defense, and it's extremely easy to get one of your units caught in his range with no escape. My game plan for this map is to build up a force of indirect units with grit and aim to take down the 2 black cannons. Once that is done, Eagle can advance on the right with bombers to take out the death ray, while Andy stands still and soaks meteors, a perfect job for his repair-based powers. This proves to be a lot harder than I thought, as Sturm's units are tough to kill. I have to do countless resets, as there are a lot of units to keep track of and very easy mistakes to make, and it takes me maybe 7 to 8 tries just to get my opener right. Eventually I am able to coordinate my missiles and indirects to where I can keep Grit's units alive and survive the first wave of Sturm's units, but it's a lot harder than it looks. A big problem are the 2 battleships that Sturm start out with. Unlike his other naval units, they are aggressive, meaning they'll move towards the closest unit. You gotta manipulate their movement so that they bounce between Grit and Andy, because if they end up too close to either player, they spell a real problem, as Grit will get his units zoned out, and Andy just doesn't have any response to the battleships at all. I actually got myself into a position where I couldn't retreat his units away from them, and I had to reset the map, which was incredibly annoying. On day 7, the first death ray comes in, and it's imperative that you move your units out of its way, lest they get picked off. But it goes off without a hitch, and I'm able to position my indirects in such a way that they can still fire on Sturm's incoming units. When the first meteor strike comes in, I actually get lucky as Sturm spawns an HP meteor, which hits Eagle's blob of infantry units, rather than the more juicy targets located in the south. I started spamming out battlecopters from Eagle's airport, and even managed to block one of Sturm's bases, which completely cuts off a section of his reinforcements, turning the right side of the map into a complete joke. Despite this, Sturm relentlessly attacks me with waves of units from his main base, and the challenge is to try and shoot them all down before they can reach my indirects. And it gets extra scary when Sturm starts sending bombers at me from the west. This forces me to spend precious funds on missiles and anti-air to stave them off. I quickly realized that there is only one way to approach this map, and that is very, very slowly. 30 days is a long time though, and I'm confident I'll win if I just play carefully and take my time. But there are certain intervals of the map where I feel like I'm progressing through the mud. Grit is stuck in the south, blasting away at Sturm's incoming troops, and he takes forever to build up a critical mass. Meanwhile, Andy is just locked behind a black cannon and can't really do anything. Only Eagle is making progress with his battlecopters, and even then it's very slow. Hilariously, I actually come to a point where I have to pop a lightning drive, as Sturm has an anti-air plonked down on a base, which I really need to get rid of. And with a combined defense of 50%, I actually need the extra firepower to take it out with a bomber. So yeah, lightning drive ended up being useful. That's a first. After a very, very long while, I am able to take out the right black cannon with Grit's rockets, and shortly after, the left one falls as well, which frees up both of my COs on my flanks. But despite this, it takes me a long time before I can blast through the pipe seams, which comes in rows of 3, which just takes a long time to eat through, even with Eagle's bombers. As the remaining days ticks down to the single digits, Sturm gets lucky and rolls an indirect meteor, which completely cripples my entire rocket line. But at this point, they've kinda served their purpose, and I don't really need them anymore. The only thing I need to do now is to get a single Eagle bomber behind enemy lines and in range of the minicannon guarding the death ray. Funnily enough, Sturm produces no units inside his main base, and while he has 2 missile units, which would have been helpful in this situation, they're both just kinda chilling around doing nothing in the north corner behind the death ray, so my bomber manages to smash its way through the minicannon without facing any opposition. And after popping a second lightning drive for style points on day 24 with no losses, I blasted the death ray with my bomber to win the entire campaign and the challenge. Rippin' pepperonis, Sturm.
Mission complete.
So yeah, I guess that concludes the challenge. Can you beat the Advanced Rescue hard campaign without losing a single unit? Apparently so, though it's not easy. And if I were forced to clear every single mission, I think there might have been a couple places where I could have gotten soft-locked, like in the Blue Moon mission T-15. It'd be interesting to see anyone else attempt to do this map deathless. Maybe some of you guys are able to see a strategy that I could not. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, videos like these are very time-consuming to make, and YouTube doesn't always reward long content, so if you actually watched all the way to the end, I'd really appreciate a like, a comment, and a share. If you want to see more videos like this on the channel, help me out by making sure it's more worthwhile to make them. Because I love creating videos like this, and I wish I had more time to do it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this unique little playthrough. If you have any ideas for similarly themed Advanced War challenges, I'd love to hear them in the comment section below. And who knows, maybe I'll be inspired to do another video like this. Until then, my name is Finn Mengs. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.